a couple came to see me, and they'd had a long history of conflicts, which is hardly unusual. That's why couples come to see me. The issue that seemed to stick out soonest, was that he'd always felt controlled by her. And it was little wonder that he thought that. He'd been controlled as a child, so he was familiar with that pattern of interacting with people. Even though he hated it, because he was familiar with it, he picked his first wife, who was a controlling person, and his second wife was a controlling person, and he still hated it, but apparently not enough to quit doing it. I met with him and his second wife. Well, obviously, because why would I meet with him and his first wife? He lived in a state of nearly constant fear of her next word, everything she would do, because it would almost certainly be controlling. Whether she was actually controlling or whether he just perceived it as controlling. In other words, he lived in a constant state of post-childhood stress disorder, constantly reacting to real and imagined pain. While he was here, he did a remarkable thing. He learned to trust. He learned to trust me, which is possibly more remarkable. And then, I suppose halfway through the second day, I had him turn to his wife and said, "I'd like to introduce you to your wife, who you're meeting for the first time." Of course, he was wondering in what way, because she didn't appear to have changed. Here's what's different. She's trying to love you. She makes mistakes. What's different is that you trust me. So now trust me when I tell you that you can trust her. That's what's different, is that you're going to trust her. She's changed some, but the primary change is in you. Trust her that what? That she'll always love you? Not realistic. Trust her that she's doing her best to love you. It finally clicked. He burst into tears. He trusted her. Sometime after they went home, he wrote me and he said, "Greg, now I'm able to live from love easier because I can identify the difference between feeling and being loving rather than being in fear." I suggest you print this out and post it somewhere. Yes, you can finally identify the difference between loving and fear because you trusted. That's the difference. I couldn't have done that. Before trusting, you couldn't possibly truly identify feeling loved or being loving. This is a huge change in your life. He continues. So I can do something different now when I feel the fear creeping in. I can stop it and remember that you love me, God loves me, and be done with the fear. You really can. The second that fear sneaks its nasty little head up, you can cut it off. He continues, "Prior to this, I was mostly living in fear and really didn't know it." Most people don't. "Now, my only fear is that I won't recognize when I'm in fear. But I trust my wife enough now to allow her, no little thing for me, yeah, no kidding, to tell me when I'm in fear." How cool is that? Oh, this is like the best. I mean, he just went crazy trusting. See, he was afraid of her all the time, but because he was afraid of her all the time, he couldn't even see when he was afraid. And see, I couldn't live with him. So here's the person he's most afraid of that he has to trust to tell him when he's being afraid. And he has to trust that she won't abuse that trust. Whew, big step. But it was easier for him to trust me in the beginning. And for me then to tell him, you can trust her. She's doing her best. It's going to be okay. She sees his fear before he does. And now he'll let her tell him. Before, he would have feared her controlling him by pointing out his fears. Because then what would she do? As soon as she would point out his fears in the past, she would say, "And now you should," and then she'd control him. Now it's different. He said, this is like being on a new planet. Scary on the one hand, but indescribably delicious on the other. And like you just said, enjoy it. And I plan to do just that. Thanks again for loving me and teaching me. I'm jumping up and down. Way to go. No more fear. You'll fall down. That doesn't matter. Just get back up. Dust off the fear and keep going. You can do this. I know you can do it because you're, doing it right now. Remarkable change in a human being. Greatest miracle there is to me, to watch a human soul trust. New subject. Woman, Maria, has been studying real love for quite some time. Her husband, Marcus, has no interest in studying. In his words, I ain't studying nothing. Which is a little weird, because everything Maria does in a real love way works for Marcus. It benefits him. And he can see that. Since she's been doing real love, she's happier. He's happier. They're happier. They have a 3-year-old who, of course, occasionally acts up like 3-year-olds do. That's just kind of, I guess, in the genes. And whenever she uses something out of the parenting book, for example, every single time she uses something out of the parenting book, it works. So the kid feels loved, they feel loved, the kid behaves better, everybody's happier. But Marcus is still an empty guy. So occasionally he has outbursts of impatience and anger and stubbornness and snottiness because, that's what people do when they're empty and afraid. They just do. People who are empty and afraid don't even realize what they're doing. So when the kid makes a mistake, the 3-year-old, and Marcus yells or stomps out of the room like a child or whatever, which is what he sometimes does, any guess how the child feels? I mean, as soon as his dad gets disappointed at him or shames at him or yells at him or stomps out of the room, then the child cries uncontrollably, which then Maria has to deal with. This is very confusing to the kid. So Maria wants both she and Marcus to be on the same page, right? Good goal, right? Duh, for two parents to be on the same page with a kid. Yes. So she, with all the good intentions in the world, proposes to her husband, to Marcus, that they read the parenting book together. But what did she forget? She forgot that he said, I ain't reading nothing. So he said, I'm not going to read any of that real love crap. A little shame and anger are good for motivating a kid from time to time. It's just too funny to hear. But when people are crazy afraid, it seems to make sense to them. So what did she say? She reacted like a mother bear in the woods, protecting her child. She said, we are going to do this. You can just smell how this is going to go. And you're just going to have to man up and do this with me, or I'm out of here. So we have two crazed animals who are talking about how to raise a human child. So the question is, what happened here? So he expressed a doubt because she was suggesting something that he wasn't familiar with, a different way of parenting. Even though he hated the way he was parented, at least he was familiar with it. And there must be something good about it because it produced him. And he's always right. So, see, he almost has to defend how he was parented. She was afraid that they were going to ruin their child. So what did she do? She tried to control him. He felt controlled, of course, so he fought back. He would have, at that moment, fought eating a piece of raspberry pie, which would be the ultimately stupid act, just because she was controlling him. So we're at an impasse, right? We're screwed. No. Find a solution. He argued to do it his way. She argued to do it her way. It just appears to be impossible. So I said, find a way that you would both agree to. And while they were arguing, he happened to say, almost accidentally, it was clearly not well thought out, he said, I ain't gonna read nothing. He said, you read that damn book and you tell me what you learned from it. And then she fought him, saying that, well, they need to read the book together. No, he's already said he's not going to do that. But see, he just gave her a solution. And she missed it. So I said, this is great. He gave you a solution. Don't ignore it. Do what he said. He just said, summarize the damned book for me. So just summarize the book. You don't have to damn it. Just summarize it. But then you two talk about the contents of the book when I say content, I mean the particular principle, until you agree on a way to implement it. Ask him how he liked to be shamed by his father, who's still alive. Ask him if he likes being shamed now. In fact, emotionally, you can point out that even now, he just hates it when a mistake is pointed out to him. If you even hint that he might be wrong, he reacts badly. That's kind of like hitting him with a sledgehammer, emotionally speaking, to point that out, because he hates being wrong, because for him, being wrong equals shame. Hates it with all of his heart. And yet, he's claiming that it's okay to use it with his son. Now, you're going to have to say that in a really gentle way. Kind of crazy on his part. I wouldn't suggest using the word crazy. Then just drop it and give him some time to digest it. Propose solutions. Figure out what's going to work. Don't keep pressing for what doesn't. If it doesn't work the first 10 times you've tried it, it's not likely to work the 11th. Here's a story about Zoe. Zoe's now 2, which is hard for me to get my head around because kids keep doing that. But at the time, she was 14 months old, so this is just a baby. At 14 months, I call them nothing. They don't do anything. And her mother says she loves being useful, and she loves putting things inside of other things. So I watched that, and I tried to include her in my everyday chores. So she carries the laundry card to the laundry room for me. She helps me load laundry in the washer. She holds the dustpan for me, all that kind of stuff that I do during the day. At first, she would interfere with all my chores. So when it occurred to me to include her, I started enjoying it a lot more. And now my chores are both more likely to get done, and she's much more likely to enjoy the day because I'm spending time with her while I'm teaching her a little. Kids really like to be loved and taught. If we don't love them, then when we go to teach them when they're 14 and they've never been loved and taught, they really don't like it all that much. If we get them used to it at 14 months, on the other hand, then we avoid all kinds of things like the mythical terrible twos, which are really mostly a lie. It's just a kid figuring out that he can finally say no and has power. The earlier we teach it, 14 months, the easier it is later on. I get to deal with kids who are, 16, 17, and 18, and wow, they got a lot more creative ways to rebel than, crying when they're that old. New subject. This is from a woman who, when I first met her, was suicidal. She said, this isn't an email. Sometimes I think my life is very difficult. Yeah, well, in some ways it is difficult. No sense sugarcoating it. There's an ever-swirling concoction of distraction in the mists of darkness that seem to conspire to take us off the path of joy. That is a fact. She continues. In particular, I think about how difficult it is to make the right decisions. Then this occurred to me today. You were addicted to narcotics for 12 years and you had to quit them and learn about love on your own. Yeah, not entirely alone, but there are still days I shake my head at how all that happened. In fact, if I ever needed proof that God will help us after all we can do, my own recovery would be enough. But now I've seen so many other people blossom when they thought there was no hope of life in them. She said, so I know you understand the principles that you teach. Yeah, sometimes. Sometimes I even live them, not always, but occasionally. She says, and I know that I'm going to find the kind of happiness you have. If I'm going to find that kind of happiness, I have to do my own work like you did. Fact. You have to experience your own trials and learn from them. They'll be different from mine. Some will be harder, some will be easier, they'll just be different. We all have to take our own path and learn from our own difficulties. There's no way to escape them. I talk to somebody every single day who, although they don't use these words, essentially they stomp up and down and say, I want my life to change without the difficulties, without the burdens, without the stress, without me doing anything, essentially. Well, yeah, me too. Except that it can't be done any more than you can build stronger muscles without actually lifting heavier weights. And finally, she says, lately I've become bored by my own movement from one crisis of faith to another. That's a lot to say, so listen again. I've become bored by my own movement from one crisis of faith to another, and I realized why I've been doing that. When I get afraid or in pain, it's like I start all over, like I'm reinventing the wheel. Instead of solving crises and focusing on what's wrong, I could be funneling that energy toward learning even more about the nuances of how to be happy, how to be a loving wife and mother, how to become closer to God. That is a useful observation. Most people live from crisis to crisis. And I can understand why. They don't know how to prevent them, so they really don't have much of a choice. The crises are just endless, and so they move from one to the other. And in a really kind of morbid way, solving crises is exciting. It kind of gives you a sense of being alive. It's the reason that teenagers, many of them, for example, cut themselves. Gives them a sense of being alive. But if that's all we do, we don't grow much, and we certainly don't get to genuine happiness. This is from somebody whose life only a year ago was a living hell. I still remember the expression on her face when I met her. And now she writes and says, a sense of freedom comes when we make decisions. Now, this is brilliant because, and she knows it, well, she knows what she's saying. It's brilliant because most of us don't make decisions. We simply react to pain. We just knee-jerk respond to everything all day long. I watch it all day long. Say something to somebody, they defend themselves. It's just automatically, endlessly, like mindless robots. I talked to a woman on the phone today, and I said something, and before I'd finished the sentence, she was arguing with me. I hadn't finished the sentence. How could she argue? How could she know what I was going to say? And I said, I haven't finished my sentence. She was actually arguing with me that I had finished my sentence. Then I tried to... She argued with everything. It was a knee-jerk response, and she couldn't stop. So see, she wasn't really making a decision. She was being a mindless robot. This writer continues. So make a choice today, she says. She's writing this to kind of, I don't know, I guess everybody. I think maybe to you for the video chat. I'm not sure. I don't remember. She said, make a choice today to align your life with real love to find peace and happiness. All it takes is to trust one person who is capable of loving unconditionally. Allow that love in and totally believe that you are loved and lovable. It is so important to let go of the obstacles that block the flow of unconditional love. The minute we complain, blame, get angry, have hatred and bitterness, try to control and manipulate, it just blocks the flow of love. It's easy to change the story. It only takes a decision. It's so much better to walk a new path without obstacles, free from victimhood and drama. Here's something that really resonated with me, and it comes from an autobiography in 5 short chapters by Portia Nelson. No idea who this person is. But the lady writing me sent it to me, and I didn't look up who the author is. I'm going to read you the whole book because it's short, like it says, short autobiography. Chapter 1. I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost. I'm helpless. It's not my fault. It takes me forever to find a way out. Chapter 2. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I just can't believe I'm in the same place. But it's not my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see that it's there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5. I walk down another street. Making decisions. Back to her, the lady who sent me the autobiography by whoever that is. She says, nothing in my world has changed. Crap still happens. It still rains. Drivers are still discourteous. People still tell lies. But my world has changed entirely. Why? Because I found one person to love me and show me what happiness is. And now I simply refuse to give it up. That's a whole lot of wisdom in a really short email. Relatively short. Short compared to most of the ones I get. Oh, here's another Zoe story. I didn't know I had 2 in here. Now she's 2. How fun, huh? We can do 10 months in 10 minutes. This Halloween is the first time she's ever had candy, and she's obviously in heaven. My husband and I always ask if we can have a piece of candy when she's got her candy out, and she says, oh yeah, sure. Without any hesitation. A 2-year-old willingly giving up candy. I never thought I would see such a thing. But wait, it gets stranger. We only allow her to have 1 piece of candy per day. And she figured out that M&Ms are her favorite. Yesterday, she was eating a little pouch of M&Ms. You've seen the Halloween size, I call them. And without any prompting, she said, Mom, do you like M&Ms? And I said, yes, I do. And she said, would you like some? 2 years old. I nearly fell over and died. I don't offer my husband candy when I'm eating it. And I have to complain when I share it with my 2-year-old. And this little 2-year-old offered to share it with me. It really is touching how children behave when they feel loved, when they're completely unafraid and not empty. They don't need to hoard candy. They've already got a great life. A mother wrote and describes to me a family meeting. Actually, she didn't write. This was by phone. The dad was speaking, but Mom sees one of the kids, pulling gum out of his mouth. Kids just cannot resist this. The rule in our house, she told me, is the gum is in your mouth or it's in the garbage. I love brief rules. Children can only remember brief rules. But the dad is speaking. He's teaching in that moment in the family meeting. So should she interrupt? Because on the whole, you don't interrupt the speaker. In this case, yeah, probably so. Because kids learn best when they're doing something they know they shouldn't be doing. So she did interrupt, said to the kid, mouth, garbage. So later, the dad says to mom, you interrupted me, and I didn't get to say what I wanted to say. So what's happening here? Dad is blaming mom. Her response, easily, she could have said, not my fault. I had to teach that principle. And then we would have had a fight over whose right it was to speak. She said, so why didn't you say what you wanted at the time? She asked a question to come to a solution instead of demanding that she'd done it right. Turns out that he might just have lost his train of thought, and it was easier to blame her for it. He could easily still have said what he wanted to say to the kid after that brief interruption, but turns out he really did lose his train of thought. So what did they do? They talked it out. They worked and agreed how that would happen next time, and that they, as partners, were working together. So, no problem. Instead of fighting about it, they would solve it together. Next time, he's decided on his own that he'll have a piece of paper there to write down the thought if he has one, if there's an interruption. Having children is an interruption. It's an interruption of life. It's an interruption of every day and a potential interruption of every minute. So her interruption was okay, and they figured out a way for him to deal with it if she does. Hooray, problem solved. I know a mother who's had, separate subject, difficulty with their daughter from age 8. Child's been resistant, defiant, demanding. Mother has spoiled the child rotten completely. So now the kid is a young adult, the daughter, and she's having trouble everywhere. School, friends, home. So I spent some time with them and helped them to understand each other. The daughter is still spoiled and entitled. The mother did what I said to help the daughter with her entitlement and selfishness, but something was still missing because they kept butting heads. The mother said that sometimes she just feels like screaming and yelling and hitting. That is the problem. Your anger. You've been teaching her the right things, but you can't do it with any anger because then you lose. And she can't hear you. She wrote back in her next email, anger is the missing piece. I've not gotten it. I've just not listened. I know you've told me 100 times and I haven't heard it. She finally gets it, that it's just the anger. She's not a bad person. Even though I told her that, like she said, 100 times by phone and email and books and video chats, she said, this has changed my whole life. I'm seeing things different. Finally, that it's about the anger. You took a long time to learn this. Possibly because your ex-husband and your daughter are where you get overwhelmed easiest. You manage to shed the anger with other people, but with family, we have greater expectations. And when they don't meet them, we get overwhelmed easier. But these are also the people where you see best what you need to learn next. So you persisted, you win. Way to go. New subject. I know a woman who fusses a lot. I call fussing kind of anything from worrying to complaining to going on and on and on with the story or acting like a victim. Fussing. What if this happens, or what if that happens? And lots of us do that. Lots, as in nearly all of us. We worry, we complain, we whine, we fuss. A productive life goes like this. You find love, you trust it, you remember it, you share it with others. And there's lots of just doing stuff. You just do your job. You just do tasks. You just do stuff. Notice that in all of that process, there is no step, no place, no room for stopping to fuss. Fussing is never the next step, ever. It doesn't help us to find love, to trust it, to remember it, to share it, or to do stuff. So it's useless. Back to the fussing lady. I told her that her fussing was hurting her. It's affecting her marriage. It's hurting her child. She wrote back, I learned a lot from what you said to me tonight. You are so right about my husband and child, feeling my fussing. Tonight I actually watched them as I was fussing, and I saw the effect. They become less peaceful. Earlier in the evening, a wise woman told me after I'd complained, fussed for a while, that she refused to continue the conversation while I was complaining. Well, what a loving soul. What a great wise person. That they would help you stop a behavior that's harming you. So I called another wise person, and she reminded me of an evening with my husband where he was moody, and I made a conscious choice not to complain and whine, and how that decision turned to a beautiful and loving evening with him, and how we had a great time. Exactly. Every single time you're on the verge of complaining, stop. If you have to stop and out loud say no, 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 which is different from saying you're bad, you're bad, you're bad. No, it's just hurtful. If you feel like driving off a bridge, you'd say no, no, no. If you feel like getting drunk before you're going to drive, you'd say no. You'd say no to a friend. And this is just as hurtful. You just remind yourself that fussing is poison. All kinds of fussing, whining, complaining, victimhood, all of it. She continues, and I remembered the feeling of that night, and I just thought, that's right. I've done it before. Stop the fussing. I'm capable of doing that. I know what it feels like to do that. And that led to, I can do it again. I can do it right now. And it calmed me down. It's so lovely to have a wise person, a wise woman, a sister like this. What a beautiful lesson to learn. You can choose. Instead of, oh, it will be awful, I can't. What if this happens? Fussing. You can choose not to. Another example of fussing is focusing on what we can't do or won't do. Another woman wrote to me and she said, I'm just not very good at fill in the blank. Could be anything. She happened to write saying, I'm just not very good at praying. Earlier today, I really wanted to say what was in my heart. I don't know if what's in my heart is all that great, but I still told God about it. Well, then you are good at praying. You did. So listen slowly. You have a tendency learned from childhood to criticize yourself and others and to be negative about yourself. You say things like, I'm afraid, I can't do this, I don't want to, I'm not good at that. It poisons you. I'm not suggesting that you be positive, which is just another form of lying. Negative lying, positive lying, still lying. Look at the truth. You just opened your heart and you told God what you were thinking and feeling. That's a prayer. Pretty good prayer, I would think. Sure, you'll get better at it, but stop beginning your thoughts with how you're no good at something. You're already in a horrible frame of mind before your next thought. She continued, I remembered how you said that I could pray about increasing my faith and to get rid of fear, so I did that too. So remember that. Save it in a file somewhere. In a later email, she wrote, I'm feeling kind of stupid about my fussing and complaining and my overall lack of trust. Thanks for loving me through all of the foolishness. Privilege. That's why we're here. To be loved while we learn and to love others while they learn. She said, I think I won't stay for olive group this week. I just don't express my feelings very well. This is in the same email. Maybe I won't talk in group either. Now I'm laughing as I'm writing. I said, this is what we were just talking about. Don't decide ahead of time that you won't speak in group, that you won't like it. Don't decide that you'll leave early. Start with what would help you grow. Say to yourself, I am willing to speak up. I might not, but I'm willing. I'll stay for group. I could change my mind at the time, but for now, I'm going to decide that I'm going to stay. I'm going to go for the whole thing. I might actually learn something. I'm going to go because I want to, not because somebody tells me to. And then you just see what you learn. Don't start out with what you won't do, because then you won't. That's the negative fussing I was talking about. Every time you stretch yourself and your abilities, you're happier. I've watched you do it. You've seen it over and over. So don't decide not to do something. Just kind of silly. Just stops you. From a woman whose life is dramatically different from even a couple of years ago. In fact, unrecognizable to people who haven't seen her in a couple of years. She said, the longer that I'm in real love, the more clearly I see my past. I remember the first time you told me that I couldn't possibly have been unconditionally loved as a child because I was miserable and unloved as an adult. I argued with you about how loving my childhood home was. Oh, how I wanted to prove to you that I was worthwhile. I couldn't possibly face the truth about my life. But now I'm remembering how things really were. My dad would bring business associates to our house. I remember lots of bluster and fakiness, but what really hurt was how he didn't seem at all happy to introduce them to me. It would be like I was an object. He'd say, here's my living room, and here's my lamp, and here's my daughter. And he had the same passion in his voice for all three. No joy, no pride, no emotion. I remember once we had to go to his workplace for something, and I had the distinct feeling that he was ashamed to be seen with me, that he reluctantly introduced me to his coworkers. And I felt awful, but I couldn't quite name what it was. We can feel how other people feel about us. And when they don't care about us, it's painful. It touches old wounds. And it touches the old wounds that we experienced when we were children and felt how people felt about us. As adults, we think little children miss all this stuff. We say, well, I was angry, but I didn't show it to my children. Oh yeah, you really did. I swear children can feel anger in the house through concrete walls. She continues about her father. He did his best. He really did. And though intellectually I can see the possible reasons for him to be that way, it's how he was raised, still, I suffered the wounds that affect me today. I married a man who treated me like an object as well, who kept me like an object in a box because I was used to it. I never completely learned to relate to the world independently. The world scared me. Well, of course, you learned early that the world was not welcoming, not approving, not nurturing. You married somebody from that world. You lived in that world seeing no choice, like I talked about at the top of the hour. Most of us don't make decisions. We just react. We just cope. We just live with what we were given. She said, like you said yesterday, despite my wounds, I have managed to do quite a bit. But now, as a late middle-aged woman, divorced, unemployed, I can still feel the pain of not being valued by most of the people I meet. But then I remember, I don't need the world's approval. I have people who genuinely love me. I have God who loves me. It makes an unspeakable difference. You get to be you and valued and loved, whether the world as a whole understands and cares about you or not. Independent. And finally, you say, I know how to love and to serve and how to be loved. What I've received from real love is beyond price. All of my experiences as a child, painful as they were, got me here. And somehow a second chance came up for me. I have no reason not to be joyful. I have no reason not to be confident. I am amazed at my good fortune. Me too. The change of a human heart is a miracle beyond expression. I'm going to talk a bit about the importance of understanding anger. I talked to a man who told me what a witch his wife was, but it was witch with a B, and how he had pointed out what she was doing. And he said, a mistake that she'd made. And he said, and I wasn't angry at all. I just pointed out that she was being critical and criticizing me and the kids, and it was upsetting the whole household. And I said, well, I believe you said that, but you were angry. He said, we're on the phone, so I'm giving you the tone and all. I was not. And how could you know? You weren't there. I said, well, you're angry at me now. He said, I am not. Now he was really raising his voice, more than I'm doing now. It was a little bit evil of me, a little bit of a trick. I said, when I pointed out that he was angry at me, because it was to make a point, I said, first, I know you, and you're angry all the time. And I explained to him the principle that I've talked about on many occasions in seminars and interventions and elsewhere, a principle that I call 258. If we've been living at an anger level of 5 all of our lives, and somebody asks us, are you angry? We might admit on a scale of 1 to 10 that we're angry at a 2, maybe. When it's really a 5, and the people around us feel it at an 8. So what do? We are constantly having arguments with the people around us about 2 versus 8, when it's a meaningless argument. All that matters is whether there's any anger at all. And in the case of this man, it's really 0, 5, and 10. He says he's not angry at all, 0. He's angry at a 5 or more, and his family feels it at a 10. Actually, it's probably 0, 8, 10, because he's angry at an 8 much of the time. Second, I said to him, I knew that if I said you were angry, you'd reveal how you really are and what you've learned about love and anger. And right now, you're angry at me, really angry. And you've done this with me on many occasions. With me, you've been angry and then told me straight to my face while you are angry, I'm not angry. Third, if you're this angry at me and denying it completely when I'm trying to help you, and we don't have a past history that goes back into your childhood, we don't have shared children, we don't have shared expectations in a marriage, imagine how angry you get at your wife when she doesn't behave as you wish. He still didn't hear it. But you might. It's the delivery that matters. Sometimes we'll deliver it without anger, and the other person will still become annoyed or offended. But boy, do we have to be careful that we're not, because it's devastating. It will kill us. We must find someone with the insight and the love and the courage to tell us when we're angry, or we won't identify it, and we won't be able to, as we've been talking about for the 3rd time now, make a genuine decision. I know a man who decided not to drink on his own. He was not an alcoholic. I know him well. He would have a drink or 2 of wine with dinner, a little bit every night. I never talked to him about it. He wrote me and he said, I think I'm going to concentrate on learning how to keep that wonderful feeling of being loved and feeling fearless and free all the time. I think it will help me at the beginning to not drink, or for that matter, do anything else that would be distracting, just so that I can practice remembering being loved and feeling wonderful, beautiful, fearless, and free from that pure source, until that is what I do without thinking at all, without any effort. Until that's how I am without trying, I think it would be good to do this, to quit drinking, so that I'm not confused And I really know that I'm not relying on alcohol or whatever behavior to feel good, to numb my pain. This is pretty brilliant stuff, like unusually insightful and courageous. I didn't talk to him about this. This is the reason to quit addictions, or anything that even might resemble an addiction, because they make it impossible for us to feel loved. They numb our pain while they're killing us, and while other things are killing us, for that matter. He continues, that way, when I'm feeling truly happy and wonderful all the time, and am truly seeing myself in my new way of living, I might be able to have a beautiful glass of wine to enjoy a moment with a friend. In fact, after all this time of not drinking, I'll be able to afford an amazing bottle of wine. Or buy a beautiful suit when I know that I don't need it to feel good about myself. Yes, you might. Just be aware, and this is for everybody, that when you do have that glass of wine, how much you want it, or whether it turns into a pattern, or why you're drinking. Just be aware, not afraid, just aware. By the way, this man's quite sincere. This isn't said for my benefit. He really lives like this. He said, I had one question left. I understand that if we are all full of love, then pleasurable things we do just add to our happiness. Being in nature, eating, watching movies, laughing, exercising, sex with our life partner, and so on. Yes, absolutely. There are also things that will always be bad for us, make us unhappy, like addictive drugs, narcotics, bullying people, controlling people, acting like victims. Where would a beautiful glass of wine fit in, or a martini? Are they always bad for us, like taking heroin? Well, no, you actually just stated it perfectly. As long as we're aware of the potential dangers, addiction, altering our mind, blocking the flow of love, such things can just be simple pleasures. What about beautiful, expensive clothes? Same thing. You've already answered your own question beautifully. As long as they don't make us feel more valuable, but just we enjoy them, well then, what's the harm? What about taking care of how we look, he says? Not just for our health, but how we look to other people. Are those things always going to make us unhappy or less happy? So may we as well get rid of the idea of doing them again? These things become bad only if we're not conscious of them. If they begin to treat our pain, if they begin to make us feel good when we otherwise would not, instead of just being an enjoyable addition to a happy life. So relax, because you really got a great picture of this. Just keep living the fulfilling and fun life you've got. Don't fuss about it. I know a woman whose entire life is different because she's accepted unconditional love and trusted it and remembered it, as we've talked about. And now she's looking for a job. And in the meantime is kind of eking by. She's just barely surviving, financially speaking. She said, I can be poor materially. I can be barely making it from rent to rent, but I feel loved. I've learned how to love the people around me. And I've made a real difference in many people's lives. She really has. You can find, trust, and remember love, and that experience is wonderful. But if you really want to know what happiness is, love others. And that is what's made the biggest difference in this woman's life. She's become devoted to sharing real love with other people. Right now, she's interviewing for jobs and is running out of her life savings. And she feels fulfilled all the time and isn't panicked at the thought of running out of money. She continues, my wealth is beyond what I ever thought possible, certainly beyond what could ever be bought with money when I have these precious relationships. And know the truth, nothing can take my experiences or knowledge or feelings. No, and as long as we all remember that, we'll be happy. The world is a loud and distracting place. So we have to consciously remember what is true. or the world will drown out what we remember and replace it with lies and distractions. All we have to do is not be paying attention, and poof, the love can be almost taken from us, almost run away from us. Kind of like turning your back on a 2-year-old in a shopping mall. Poof, it's gone. Here's a guy who says, whenever I leave a room or get out of bed to go to the bathroom or get a bite out of the kitchen, my wife says, "Where are you going?" And she's visibly concerned. I care about her being afraid. So what could I say that would be loving to her to let her know that everything's okay and I'm not going anywhere, and so that she doesn't get afraid every time I leave for 2 minutes? It's very sweet of you, by the way, to notice her fears. That is loving. Most people would be annoyed at being interrogated about where they're going by their partner. You didn't voice any irritation with it at all. You could tell her that if you're ever going to be gone longer than, pick a number, 5 minutes, you'll tell her, no matter where it is. So then she doesn't have to ask. She doesn't have to wonder. It's not intentional or conscious, but each time she asks you, she actually adds to her fears. She makes them reasonable in her mind. And by reassuring her that she doesn't need to ask, and you'll probably have to say this more than once, you'll be able to help her see her fears. And it's when we see them that we're able to, as we've said now for the, fourth time, we can make decisions not to be afraid. A man called me. He was consumed with anger and frustrated with the futility of life. He was ruining his marriage and his young child. He was suicidal. Been to 2 therapists. He said there was no purpose in life. What should I do? He asked. I talked to him for a little bit longer, and it was pretty obvious that he'd been wounded for his entire life, and recommending a book was not going to do it, and going online and participating in free conference calls wasn't going to do it. So I suggested that he would probably require an intervention from somebody. There are a number of people who do them now. It doesn't matter if it's me. I said if I could think of anything less intensive that would work, I would suggest it. And he said, now this is a man who is suicidal and who's destroying his family. He said, well, I was kind of hoping that we could just do this over the phone. I said, well, me too, but I've been doing this far too long to believe in that. Is there a chance that we could make some progress over the phone? Yeah, a little itty-bitty, teeny-weeny one, but your pain is far too great and the consequences far too great to take that chance. I was a surgeon for 20 years. I worked in emergency rooms for years and years. And in the years that I worked in emergency rooms, people would call with chest pain and difficulty breathing and pain running down their left arm. Would it have been easier to just suggest over the phone aspirin and rest? Just like trying to help this man over the phone. Yes. But would it have worked? Actually, sometimes, yes. Turns out that some people really early in a heart attack, if you give them aspirin, can anticoagulate their blood just enough. You might be able to prevent a heart attack. Or it may be that their chest pain and difficulty breathing and even pain down their left arm can be due to acid reflux. So you could suggest antacids. Maybe. But considering the price of making a mistake over the phone, death, because in a heart attack, what matters most is what happens in the first 30 to 40 minutes. No kidding. It's not worth the risk. Same with people in emotional pain. Never in the emergency room when somebody called in with those symptoms did I suggest they take antacids or aspirin. People who are in severe pain need more than a phone call. It's not worth the potential damage to do half measures with people who are in enough physical or emotional pain. Life's hard, and we're all going to experience pain in our lives. We can't prevent the pain, but we can find the love we need. We can trust it. We can remember it. We can learn to share it with other people, and we can create the happiness that we're meant to have in this life. It's an absolute promise. See you in a week.